All right, so yesterday we learned how to find out the standard deviation. Now we're going to learn how to use the standard deviation. Here's a formula that we have. We called x minus mu over sigma. Now, the mu, the Greek letter mu, yesterday I mentioned that I'm going to use red for this. I mentioned that the Greek letter mu that stands out for average. And sigma, I call this sigma. That's the Greek letter called sigma. That stands for standard deviation. Now, the formula x minus mu over sigma, the top part is going to tell me how much apart, what's the difference from my average. If my x minus mu happens to be a positive value, then my number is above the average. If my x minus mu is a negative value, my number, my x, is below the average. So the x minus mu, that tells me what's the difference from the average. Remember, it's above the average, I have a positive value. If it's below the average, I have a negative value. And then my result, I'm going to divide it by standard deviation, in this case by sigma. Now let's take a look. A normal distribution of scores has a standard deviation of 10. So on my fraction, I'm going to have a 10 at the bottom. Find the z-scores corresponding to each of the following values. A score that is 12 points above the mean. Remember I said that x minus mu, the top of my fraction, is for me to know what's the difference from the mean. If it's above the mean, it's a positive value. If it's below the mean, it's a negative value. So above is positive, below is negative. So a score that is 12 points above the mean, that means I have a positive 12 on. Now my z-score, let me find out how much is 12 divided by 10. And I'm just going to say this happens to be 1.2. That's my z-score. All I'm doing is, what's the difference from the mean? So it's positive if my number is above the mean, negative if it's below the mean. We're going to use this formula a little bit more tomorrow. Now let's take a look at number 6. A normal distribution score has a standard deviation of 10. So I have a 10 at the bottom. Find the z-scores corresponding to each of the following values. A score that is 23 points below the mean. So on the top, I have a negative 20. Now, negative 23 divided by 10, that happens to be negative 2.3. That's how easy it is to find the z-score. Take a look at a couple more examples. Number 7. A normal distribution of scores has a standard deviation of 24. Find the z-scores corresponding to each of the following values. A score that is 17 points below the mean. So I'm going to put a negative 17. Now I need a calculator for this. I want to know how much is 17 divided by 24. I'm ignoring the negative sign right now. Once I type in my answer, once I answer it, I will include the negative sign. Just wanted to know numbers-wise, how much is 17 divided by 24? In my case, for today's homework, like once you guys go into statistics, there's something talk about rounding. There's a way of how to round numbers. But in my case, let's round it out to 2 decimal places. Right, we're in algebra 2, so let's round it up to 2 decimal places. So in my case, it looks like 0.71. Remember, I'm going to round it up to 2 decimal places. So negative 0.71. Remember, I went to 2 decimal places. All right, let's take a look at question number 8. A normal distribution of scores has a standard deviation of 24. My standard deviation is 24. Find the z-scores corresponding to each of the following values. A score that is 25 points above the mean. Now let me get my calculator. 25 divided by 24. Remember, I'm going to 2 decimal places. I'm going to call this 1.04. That's how easy it is to find a z-score. Now, let's take a look at this. For each z-score, so I'm going to give you guys the z-scores now. Find the percentile, so percent of individuals scoring at or below a certain z-score. Now, let me talk about percentages. I want to talk about the 68, 95, 99.7 rule. What this means, what this thing says is the average is going to be in the center. You guys see there's my mu. Notice how I have a mu plus a sigma. It's right here. And I have a mu minus sigma. Now that gives me that pink area. Now what we know as the 68, 95 and 99.7 rule is between that pink area, I have 68.27. So about 68% of all my data. Most of my data will be within the pink area. It's just mu plus sigma and mu minus sigma, which is the average plus standard deviation and net average minus 1 standard deviation. Now, let me go for blue. You see how here I have u, so mu minus 2 sigma, so average minus 2 standard deviation. And then here I have the average plus 2 standard deviation. Now, within those two, I'm going to have about 95% of that data. Now here I have u plus 3. Let me go for green in this case. U plus 3 sigma, mu minus 3 sigma. So the average plus 3 standard deviation, the average minus 3 standard deviation. In between them, I have about 99.7 of the population of my data. So this is what we talk about percentages. Now my sigma, my mu, my mu, this is at 50%. My table that I'm going to use is one that I gave you guys yesterday, which is this one. This is going to give me percentages. Now this percentage tells me how much I have to add to the average, how much percentage I have to add or subtract from to the average. And my results is going to give me, so let's say I add 1 sigma, so it puts me right here. That percentage that it gives me is how much is below that value. So my table, my percentage that it gives me, my z-score is going to give me a percentage. I'm going to add or subtract that to the mean, which is 50%. Now that tells me how much I have to the left, which is below that percentage. Let's talk about a little more in example. So let's look at here. For each z-score below, find a percentile or percent of individuals scoring at or below negative 0.27. So let me show you guys how to do this. Remember, we're looking for my z-score is negative 0.27. So I'm just gonna, my values here, it gives me my first decimal place. So I should be looking at this row right here. 0.2. I'm ignoring the negative right now. Now, remember it was 0.27, negative 0.27. So this thing gives me the first decimal place, up to the first decimal place. So 0.2. My second decimal place, I'm going to get it from here. There's my 7. So they meet. So negative or 0.27 is 0.1064. So remember that number. Remember the list on the left gave me up to my first decimal place. Up to my first decimal place. I continue, and then the rows on the top will give me my second decimal place. So 0.27, the decimal that it gave me is 0.1064. Let's remember that. Let me write that over here, 0.1064. Okay, so how am I going to find this? I'm just going to say, well, average, the percentage is it's 50%. So 50%, usually written as 0.5, minus, I'm going to subtract, since my C-score is a negative. So I'm going to subtract because my C-score is negative. I'm going to subtract 0.1064. All right, let's do that. 0.5 minus 0.1064, and I have 0.3936. Gives me a decimal by 0.3936. Now here, be careful how I ask you guys. If I say, give me the percent, move the decimal twice to the right. If I say, give me the proportion, keep that decimal as it is. So here I'm asking for the percentile or percent. Make sure you move the decimal twice to the right. And I'm just going to say 39.36%. That's it. Let's take a look at question number 10. For each C-value score, find a percentile or percent of individuals scoring at or below 1.62. Okay, so let's take a look. 1.62. 1.6 is right here. And then the 2 is right here. So 1.62 happens to be that. 1.62 is the number 0.4474. So we got to remember that. All right, so 0.4474. Let me do 0.4474. Let me double check. Okay, yeah. Okay, so that was the value that I got from my C-scored. Now, because my C is a positive, I'm just going to go 0.5 plus 0.4474. You figure that out. So 0.5 plus 0.4474. That gives me 94.74%. I'm asking for the percent of individuals scoring at or below the C value. Now, on your homework, instead of saying below, I might say above. I might say above. Now, if I do include the word above instead of below, we have to do one more thing. If I happen to say above is, I know 94.74 is below that value, 94.74. Now, how much is above is the remainder of 100%. So I'm just going to go 100% minus 94.74. So if I ask you how much is above, you guys should say 5.26%. Once again, my number that I get from my table I'm going to add it or subtract it depending on my side. Subtract it like number 9. Subtract it if my c-score is negative. Add it if my c-score is positive like I did in number 10. And that's going to give me a percentage. And that is my percentile, or the percent of individuals scoring at or below that value. Now in the homework, like I said, I'm going to ask you guys sometimes above. Instead of below, it's going to say above. If I do say above, you have to go 100% minus your percentage. Okay, so let's move on. Let's take a look at number 11. For each c-score below, find a proportion of cases. Notice I say proportion. In this case, I don't want the percentage. I want the decimal. So for each c-score below, find a proportion of cases falling below the c. And then my c-score is negative 1.25. Okay, so let me get my table. 1.25. Here's 1.2. Here's my 5. So 1.25 is here. All right, 1.25 is 0.3944. Once again, 1.25 is 0.39 or 0.3944. All right, so I have to come over and say 0.5, I start at 0.5 minus, I'm going to subtract since my c-score is negative. So I'm going to subtract 0.3944. So let me go and I'm just going to go 0.5 minus 0.3944. My proportion, remember, if it was percent, I would say 10.56%. So if I ask you for the percentage, move the decimal twice to the right. Because I'm asking for the proportion, do not move the decimal place. My answer here is 0.1056. And once again, because it says below the c-score, I stop there. If by any chance it says above, so let's say I ask you guys for how much is above, I would have said 1 minus, because that's 1 minus 0.1056, 0.8944. So if I ask you how much is above, you just go 1 minus. So remember, 100%, it's written as a 1. So 1 minus 0.1056, that's what's going to give me how much is above. But because it says below, I just stop at 0.1056. Now let's take a look at question number 12. For each c-score below, find a proportion of cases. Proportion, so leave it as a decimal, falling below the c. And my c is 0.72. Let me use my table. 0.72. Here's 0.7. Here's the 2. So 0.72 is there. 0.72 happens to be 0.2642. 0.72 happens to be 0.2642. All right, so how do I define my proportion? I'm going to go 0.5. I always start at 0.5 or 50%. So 0.5 plus, I'm going to add, since my c-score is positive, so plus 0.2642. So let me figure that out. 0.5 plus 0.2642, and that gives me 0.7642. Because I'm asking you guys for how much is below, just leave it at that. If I ask you guys how much is above the C, then you have to go 1 minus 0.7642, and that will give you your result. So if I ask you guys how much is above, You still have to go 1 minus the decimal part. But because I'm asking how much is below, just leave it at that.